This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. I'm very, I'll just kind of preface my remarks with this. Thanksgiving is one of my favorite holidays in the year. Yeah, American Thanksgiving. And for a whole lot of reasons, not the least of which is the gratitude that we get to acknowledge and celebrate as we sit around the family table and we have friends and neighbors coming over. But the other piece that I'm particularly grateful for is the centerpiece of that table, which typically is a turkey. And I mention that in part because Mark Peters, my guest today, is the CEO of Butterball Farms, and they are quite well renowned for their turkeys. But that's not why I'm having him on the show today. But I wanted to mention that just to kind of park it and say Mark is going to have some conversational tidbits here that has resonance with the whole idea of the soul of business, the nature of gratitude, and also just what it means to actually pay attention to the people in your life in a way that actually allows them to fully be who they are in some very interesting ways. He's got a fascinating book that has just dropped, The Retention Trap, and I'm going to be very specific about this. A lot of folks that I work with, particularly CEOs and the executive suite that the clients that I work with, employee engagement is probably the holy grail. How do we keep our people emotionally engaged? And part of the implied reason they want to do that is retention. And so their focus is on retention. I mean, that's the default. How do we keep our people? Mark's book is taking that notion of retention and kind of turning it on its head just a little bit here. He's got a different take on it that ends up actually addressing how do we keep our people, but more specifically, how do we keep the people that we want to keep in a way that allows them to thrive and ultimately have our business thrive. And I mentioned Butterball Farms. It's been recognized nationally as one of the best and brightest companies to work for in the country. Literally, 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. You just kind of check it off here. They are one of the best companies on the planet in terms of employee retention, in terms of people's experience, all of those sorts of things that we would love to have our people say about us. These people are saying this by their actions. And that is not an accident. That is a very specific, intentional consequence of a focus that we're going to be exploring today. So with that big, soapbox monologue here, I want to welcome Mark Peters to the show. Mark, welcome to the show.
Blaine, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. I do have to make one clarification, though, and that is that our company, Butterball Farms, is not in the turkey business. So,
oh my God!
I know. It's
really.
I tell people we have a historic and no economic relationship. So my father was involved in some of the development work with the Butterball turkey and owned some of the intellectual property around it.
Mm-hmm.
And sold all of that to Swift and Company in the 60s and retained the name to use with our butter company. So we're not the multinational turkey company. And I just like to set that straight for the audience right up front. But thank you for the nod. Definitely in our heritage for sure. And
yes. Well, I'm going to talk to my research people. I thought that we had that T crossed and that I dotted.
And maybe that's good for my notes pages too. I should put that right at the top. So,
well, that being said, Swift and Company is a good company as well. I don't want to denigrate, in any way, shape, or form what they managed to do with that brand. But the real intent here has to do with what you've done with the company, best and brightest companies to work for.
Yeah.
And it's not a turkey. The company's not a turkey. It's
No.
actually got something. Yeah, the
No.
cachet there is extraordinary. Um, the soul of
We do make
business.
little
Yeah.
butter turkeys, but uh, so when I think about the soul of business, I don't want to get into a whole discussion on capitalism and how it's practiced today. However,
Yeah.
I think that we've lost a little bit of sort of the true nature of capitalism, and that is
Yep.
being able to bring holistic value to a system. And when I think of the soul of a business, I think in very holistic terms. And the book, The Retention Trap, talks about it a little bit more specifically and really thinking about building human capital and the
Mhm.
opportunity that we have with our enterprises to build human capital, whether it's for us and our future of our business, for our communities. And when we focus on building human capital and investing in our people, what you get is people who are more resilient in our economy and in our own businesses, which then makes our business more resilient. But it also makes our futures more resilient and our communities more resilient, because technology is changing our businesses so quickly today that we may or may not have the next job for somebody. But if we can prepare them to go someplace else and find an equally or better job because they're better prepared, that's a great thing that we get to do as business owners. And so, when I go to what you're asking about the soul of the business, I think part of what we get to do as entrepreneurs and business owners and enterprise people that get to run enterprises is we get to make the world better by the way that we invest in the people that come to work for us.
Yeah, I'm very fond of saying in the work that I do with the clients with whom I work that all an organization is, at the end of the day, is a collection of people that are in relationship. And if the
Yeah.
relationships are working well, you've got a pretty good shot at being successful. And people will go, well, yeah, of course, that seems pretty simple. And I go, well, let's unbundle this just a little bit. I'm not talking just about the interpersonal relationships. I'm talking about the relationship that these people have with their job, with their work process, with themselves, with their chair, with their parking places. I mean, all of this has a relational component to them. And if these varied relationships are actually functioning fairly well, you got a pretty good shot. That invites a question and an exploration around how do I develop high quality relationships? Because that's now the focus, the qualitative nature of the relational dynamic in the business. So your work, stop measuring turnover and start measuring talent investment. I have a relationship with talent. I have a relationship with my skill set. I have a relationship with what's required of me on the job, expectations, all of those sorts of things. How did you come to begin paying attention to this?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll tell you a quick story, and it's one of the first ahas for me was probably in the late 90s. And we had a group of individuals that would come to work for us. We later found out they were coming out of a work release program. So they were they were on time. They were there every day. And we come to find out they kind of had to be. But the other thing that was interesting was these were people that I wanted to promote. They were hard workers, and we didn't always have the next job for them. And I really wanted to make sure that if they didn't keep working for us, they'd go to work for another company that would treat them well and offer them advancement opportunities. But and I'll call them kids because they were in their mid-20s. And they were so earnest and so hardworking. And I felt like I wanted to promote them and I wanted to give them the education and the training, but I didn't have any place for them to go. And I think what I learned from that is I got a lot of joy out of unlocking potential in people and knowing that I have a platform in my enterprise to do that. Really started down this road of investing in talent and trying to either grow internally or get people ready to go to a better job after they leave us.
Yeah. See, now that's in and of itself, I think that's a point of that is really worth putting a pin in. If I'm focused solely on keeping people, by definition, I'm going to keep, because I'm thinking out loud here, but I'm going to want to keep them in my company. But I'm in that context. To your point, if I don't have a place for them to grow into, I'm going to actually be stifling their growth, their development. So the holistic side of what you're describing here is I'm more interested in them growing as fully as they can be, even if it's outside of my company. That's a difficult circle to square for some people. And I've had conversations with leaders about that.
It's tough. And and in today's day and age of sort of, everybody talks about talent scarcity. It's a tough conversation to have. So when we were writing the book, my writer asked me, she's like, you need an analogy for this. You need an analogy. And I could not. I just kept saying, I don't have a good, I don't know what the analogy is. But then I spent some time out in Salt Lake City and I got to visit the Great Salt Lake. And so the Great Salt Lake is a terminal lake. Well, there's like 3 rivers that run into the Great Salt Lake and no rivers that run out of it. Consequently, there's only like 2 organisms that live in the Great Salt Lake. And I live in the Great Lakes area, which is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. Water flows in from all kinds of places. Water flows out to 2 different ocean systems. And so, the analogy is, do you want your business to be like the Great Salt Lake or do you want it to be like the Great Lakes?
Great analogy.
And I think if we think of ourselves more as a steward of talent, then somehow like we have a right or some level of ownership to the talent, I think we end up with much more dynamic enterprises.
Yeah, it's you literally, if you're doing this well, because part of what creeps into this is a conversation around, what am I actually building? What's the legacy that I'm actually going to be passing on to my heirs or leaving behind? As a consequence of the work I do, which actually for me moots the question of, well, why would I develop my people if they're going to leave anyway? Well, I'm going to develop my people because they're going to allow us to be more of what we can be as an organization. With that being said here, I've got a question around talent challenges. I mean, mid-sized, small companies. What are some of the key challenges? I've worked with Fortune 50 companies for decades, and I'm pretty familiar with some of the challenges that are running rampant there. But the small and mid-sized companies, these challenges tend to be somewhat unique to that category. What are you seeing in the work that you've done I think identify some of this in your book that leaders and business owners can actually begin to pay attention to and address?
So I think a big one is for a lot of the positions in a small to mid-market company, we have a lot of what I would call one-of-one positions, like a director of finance, or for me, it's a director of food safety and quality, one-of-one. I don't, and not that we don't have people on our quality team, but they don't carry the credentials of the person that I need to run that division. technical maintenance people, not maybe one of one for us. But so you have these people in your organization that are skilled and super valuable to the organization. And you can't stop them from leaving. Like if, in an increasing wage environment, like we've gone through with, benefits and work schedules being offered by lots of different organizations, the risk of losing one of those one of one people is very high. And normally in a work environment where, if someone comes and says, "Hey, Blaine, I'm thinking that I might want to go to the next level with another company." Lots of companies will shut that relationship down very quickly. That's kind of a treacherous conversation to have, right? And so what we get stuck with as the enterprise, people that run the enterprise, we get stuck with a 2 weeks notice or something less than that. And then we have to go out to the market and try to find somebody to do this technical job. And hopefully we get the right person,
Yeah. Hopefully.
So hopefully, right. And we all have stories about how we didn't.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do here in this conversation in this book is say, what if we acknowledge the fact that somebody might want to leave our company? What if it was okay for someone to come and have the conversation with you and say, you know what, I think I don't see the next level here, and I'd like to go to the next level, and have that be an okay conversation. In fact, you will let me network you to some of the people that I know that might help you find that next job. But will you help me backfill your position? Can we agree to do this in a way that you'll help me validate that the person I'm bringing in has the skill set they need to do the job that you're doing, right? And how do we de-risk those conversations so that it's okay for people to talk about career mobility, whether it's in or without our own enterprises? And in today's world, that's not a safe conversation.
Right.
But I scratch my head. I love the way that you sit back and think about things, because I've thought about this for a lot of years. I don't understand why us as entrepreneurs haven't tackled this problem. And we tend to think of it as a problem without a great solution. And the reality is, if we take the time to sort of get to know the aspirations of the people that work for us and are okay with them growing into their own aspirations, we can solve this problem. I'm actually, you asked me offline before we started how the launch of the book was going, and what I didn't mention was one of the outcomes of the actual launch is I'm in the process right now. I'm working with 7 companies in the West Michigan area, and we are going to build a talent network between our companies so that we can move and exchange talent. So there actually becomes a flow through our 7 companies. And, hopefully we want to test it a little bit first, but hopefully we'll be able to bring on more companies to do this. And it's a long game. I mean, we're not going to build it in 90 days, right? I mean, this is going to be a long game, and they've signed on for about a 2-year test. So I think that's pretty remarkable. And as small to mid-market companies, if we can flip our mindset around talent and think about how we can invest in and interact with talent flow, and then link arms with other employers, other enterprise people that run enterprises in our community, then we'll be able to compete with the larger companies. And one of the things that we have that large scale companies really struggle with is we have proximity to our people. We have the opportunity to get to know them and to understand their stories and hear about their families. And you get into big scaled companies and they really have a difficult time with that. And that proximity is human. And it goes right back to your soul of the business, right? So
Yep.
we get to experience more humanity in our organizations, I think, than large scaled organizations.
And it's that humanity piece. I mean, you started off, your side of the interview when after I introduced you, talking about just kind of the nature of capitalism as it is today, and we kind of tacitly agreed not to go into that hole very deeply.
Right.
But I do agree. Yeah, there's a lot that we can do with that, I think.
Right.
Yeah, we're not going to. Okay, I keep skirting that. I keep bouncing out of that. But the idea of John Maynard Keynes, at one point in time, this goes back to the 1940s, I think, he said, if capitalism actually realized the promise that is embedded in that model, the question that we will be wrestling with is what do we do with our time? What do we do with who we are? Because basically all of the, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all of the basic needs have been handled, assuming the model works well. Now, the model hasn't worked well. That's another story and completely. But the question, and this is, I love what you're doing here with this group of CEOs, creating the source, because now what you're addressing is the idea of who do I get to be as a consequence of participating with you as an organization. And this goes literally right back to recognized as one of the best and brightest companies to work for. I get to be more of who I am as a consequence of being with you. And it's completely absent any conversation around salary or any of that other stuff that can actually trip us up sometimes. It's more about the meaning that is inherent in the way I get to express who I am in my life, and I get to do that through the work that I do. Now, I'll get off my soapbox here in just a moment, but I've got a question that's embedded in this for you, and it has to do with a traditional business question. What's the ROI of me as a business leader investing in my people, knowing that there's a likelihood that they're going to go someplace else and they're going to utilize my investment in another organization? What's the ROI for me?
I love that question. I love it because, it's often asked, like, how do you measure this? What's the, and I there's probably another book here, like instead of the retention trap, it's the financial trap. Like, I think it depends. And this goes back to the, whether it's the soul of the business or the conversation about capitalism, is what do you want the impact to be of the business? And so I'm going to give you a quick story. And we just had our Founders Day event. And instead of me addressing all of our employees this year, I actually invited a young lady who started working for us in her early 20s. And she came to work for us as a single mom in our plant. And managed to work her way up into a couple different positions, caught my attention, and I really challenged her to go back to school and made sort of a first investment in her first go at going to school. She moved on to another company that ultimately joined our source network, and that company continued to invest in her education and development. Today, she's finishing up working on her PhD. She's got a global HR position with Hutchinson Corporation. Wow. She's inspired over 50 of her nephews and nieces. So in a Hispanic family where she was the first one to ever get higher education attainment is now seen as attainable. And I don't remember how many of her nephews and nieces are now working on master's degrees, but you can't measure that ROI. You can't measure that multi-generational cross-family impact that investing in people and creating a culture. And so she said to me at the end of the lunch, she said, you know what you should do? You should have a panel of people next year that have worked here and gone on to do other things. And I'm like, you know what? I could do that. I have ex-employees that have started businesses. I have ex-employees that have gone to work for their spouse's company. I mean, it's incredible. And you start trying to look at the community impact from that. The ROI it's staggering.
Yeah.
Staggering.
Yeah. Yeah. The social impact, the purpose of business from my perspective, now you've got to make money to stay in business, but that's not the purpose of business. The purpose of business from my perspective is to uplift the experience of being alive on the planet. That's the purpose of business. Through my product or my service, you get to experience being uplifted. And if I'm doing that well, you're going to beat a path to my door. I won't have a surfeit of customers. That's just going to be there. If that becomes the purpose of the business, it's axiomatic that I'm going to be investing in my people because I'm going to develop. They've got to be uplifted as a consequence. And I'm just enthralled with the idea of the source network. I really, really, my hat's off to you and your compatriots for founding this. It's brilliant. You talk about outside the box. I think it's just an incredibly brilliant way of looking at the sourcing question. I mean, how do I hire people? Yeah. Who do I hire? Where do I get in? What's the talent pool? Well, I don't have to do it by myself. And I don't have to pay a headhunter.
And that's my first book was The Source, and that organization's over 22 years old now. So we've got 20 years of data on that, and that's a great model for people to look at. But the next step is really this investing in people and getting them ready for whatever our businesses are going to go do next, and get them ready for whatever they want to do next.
That's great. Well, speaking of next, there are some initiatives that some companies are already undertaking in this, within this context. Can you cite, one or two examples that actually showcase some of the ways that this is actually being translated into real life practice?
Yeah, so I do some of that in the book, and there's some large scale. I think the easiest one to point to is the Chamber of Commerce Foundation Talent Pipeline Management. They have a very robust curriculum around talent management and talent investment. And, small to mid-market companies are not going to hear about it because they're really targeting large scale systems to roll it out. But the content is available to anybody that wants to download it. And you can join groups across the country that are already underway. I do my only, if I have to critique it at all, is that it's very enterprise centric and it's not very people centric. And so again, the opportunity we have as, the mid-market, small mid-market employers is we get to take those tools and put them to work in a people-centric environment in our own enterprises and with our own partners in our communities.
I love it.
So
keep it, think global, act local. Not to be trite about it, but that's essentially. This is keep it close to home. This is where we work. This is where we live.
Yeah, and I think part of my desire in writing the book is there's tools out there, right, that already exist, and you don't have to go build them from scratch as a small to mid-market employer, which is a daunting task. So I just encourage people to do, to look into some of the things that are cited in the book if they're interested in a little bit of a shortcut.
Shortcuts are always good. Where can people find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah, so two ways that are pretty easy. One is just look for Mark Peters, Butterball Farms on LinkedIn. And another one is it's theretentiontrap.com. is a website that will give you the book, my first book, The Source. It'll give you information on some of the initiatives that we're doing. And it's a great way to connect with me there as well.
Great. Well, we'll be sure that those are in the show notes. And Mark, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I don't want to overemphasize this. I'm not sure I ever could overemphasize it. I'm thrilled with what you're doing, and just the nature of the focus. I believe it's in the sweet spot of what needs to be addressed. And with the risk of bringing the conversation to capitalism back into place again, if there's a cure to some of the stuff that we see going on right now, paying attention to the right things is one of the ways that gets addressed, whether it's income inequity or, again, I'm not going to, I'm feeling the gravity tugging me in that direction. I'm going to back up a little bit here. But Mark, I love what you're up to, truly, and I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me on the show. It's been enlightening.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Absolutely. You can find out more about Mark, again, at theretentiontrap.com or on his LinkedIn page, Mark Peters at Butterball Farms on LinkedIn. I'm Blaine Bartlett. You've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. As always, my admonition to you is find a way in your life to be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. You're going to find your life works a whole lot better when you're in tune with how nature works. And nature works through distribution. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you on the next episode.
This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.